boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello everybody, Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, going live from you ain't gonna believe from where. And if you look behind me, you see a picture window and you're gonna see a reflection. Uh-oh, what happened there? Let's stop that. Anyway, there's a reflection behind me. There's a window. And when you look there, you can see part of our kitchen, and you can see the queen over there, and she's actually cleaning up the cabinets because we're gonna have company after a while. Now this place isn't ready to live in, but we're gonna be living in it. Still needs some paint. If y'all know any great painters around Pecan Plantation, we could use one. Hey, you guys know the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like, share this video to your timeline. You're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat. There's one right there. And a Pond Boss mug, which I know it's in my truck, but I hadn't been able to get to it. So, and also share this video or tag some of your friends that you know that have ponds. Tonight, I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about the food web and see how that goes. Let's see, look at there. John Funk, Brian Lee Baker, Blair Ulring, Kim Moore. We got Illinois, Michigan. Blair, I forget where you're from. I should know that, but I don't. Anyway, Dennis Smith. I see Dennis checking in as well. Good to see you guys. Yeah, that reflection is pretty cool. If you look over my... Oh, there's Debbie. Look at her. Wave, honey. There she is. That's pretty cute. You can see her pantry door, a very cool pantry door. She's not quite ready with it yet, but dadgummit, here we go. Michael Gray, see Michael Gray. Ice on the pond yesterday, 60 today, snow tomorrow up there in Michigan. Central Oklahoma, Justin Ludwig. Hey, I talked to a guy from Kingfisher today, so looks like I might get to come up in your neck of the woods. Maybe not quite where you are, Justin, but west of you a little bit, and spend a little bit of time helping design a new lake. That'll be kind of fun. James Evans. Yeah, it is. John Funk, it is great to be home. I don't know what it's like to be home, but here we are. So I'm going to try to get used to it. Aren't you, honey? Sure am. This whole thing is pretty well worn her out. So let's talk a little bit about the food web. Readier, you're 10 miles south of Kingfisher. Well, Justin, send me an email. I don't know when I'm going to go, but I'd love to tag up with you and see what's going on. I thought you were a little bit east of Kingfisher. I don't know why I thought that, but here we go. I wanted to kind of come at you from an angle that I haven't thought about before. I see Mark Hicks, Troy Seal, Matthew Key. Glad to see you guys. I thought I'd come at you from an angle of about the food chain that people don't really think about. Wesley Ellis in Georgia. Good deal. Good to see you, Wesley. You know, when we talk about the food chain, especially when we're trying to stock a brand new lake, there, look at there. There's Matt Rail, honey.
No, tell Matt Rail I said hello.
Debbie says, hello, Matt Rail. We're hanging out in the new digs. We're going to call it Lusk Landing, comma 3, LL, comma 3. We've had LL1, LL, comma 2. Now we're going to be in LL3. Yep, hello from Northeast Kansas, Sean Duncan. Good to see you. So I thought I'd come at a different spin, different angle on the food web. You know, when you stock a brand new lake, based on your goals, you're going to do what you can do to create the food chain that supports your predator fish. Hello, Kathy Black. Good to see you. And typically that means, depending on the part of the planet, like when you're in Indiana, where Matt Rail is, Rushville, and check out Matt's page as well. Matt, put a little plug in there for what you got going on. Matt's got a non-profit organization, Private Waters website and stuff. Put your Facebook page up there too. Russell Whittick, good to see you. Tom Blasdale, good to see you. So, like in Indiana, Matt's going to stock fathead minnows, bluegill sunfish, Readier sunfish, and the more Matt does from the front gate at Granbury, did you get a pass for the kids to get in?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. I don't know, but I'm using my phone. I'm broadcasting from it. Woo. So a lot of things going on. You know, we got a lot of plates spinning in the air right now. But when Matt's going to do it, he's going to stock fathead minnows, bluegill sunfish, Readier sunfish. And in special occasions, there's Travis. Good to see Travis. He may stock yellow perch, depending on what the mission is for that pond. But what I want to do tonight is talk a little bit about the base of the food chain and energy conversion. All the energy for a pond comes from the sun. Now, there's Frank James. Hey, Frank. So, I don't know if you really thought about that or not, but the energy for a pond comes from the sun. Now, that's natural energy. Now, we can enhance natural energy with fish food or fertility, things like that. But the energy comes from the sun, and what that does is it creates the avenue with water as the vehicle to promote the growth of microscopic plants and animals called plankton. And that's where the food chain starts. It starts with plankton, it starts with periphyton, it starts with biofilm, it starts with the little microscopic things that feed the next level. So in the South, that's why we're always talking about fertilizing water. Now, where Matt is in the Midwest, in Indiana, going north, you're going to pull somebody's teeth before you convince them it's smart to fertilize water, because they're so, most of the ag states, especially what politicians call the flower states, they got all the fertility they need. Matter of fact, they have more, so you're trying to extract it. I know Matt spends a lot of time trying to extract phosphorus from water, where in the South, we're using phosphorus to convert to plankton to help create the base of the food chain. So when you're in the Midwest or northern tier states, timing of managing your plankton bloom is real important. Now in the South, we got latitude because we got a longer growing season for plankton. I'm going to circle back to this growing season thing in a minute. Now there's a couple articles coming up in the next issue of Pond Boss that you really need to read. So if you haven't subscribed to the magazine yet, it's $35 a year. Cheaper than a Friday night date, and it lasts a year. Think about that. Cheaper than a Friday night date, $35. My wife always shakes her head when she hears me say that. Sorry, honey. Not really. Travis says, are we in the new house? I'm sitting in it right now. I'm sitting on a cedar bench, window behind me. Right behind me is the Brazos River that you can't see because it's dark. We're in it, but it ain't finished. We still got some paint and electrical work to do. So with this energy conversion from the nutrients with the sun boosting it at the correct temperature, we're going to create the very base of the food chain. Now what the base of the food chain does is it feeds the next level. So look at it like a food pyramid. We've all heard that. We've all studied it. We all kind of know what that is. And the way that works is at every trophic level, there's about a 10-to-1 conversion ratio. So it takes about 10 pounds of plankton fueled by the energy from the sun to create 1 pound of what eats plankton. Now that's typically bigger plankton, daphnia, water fleas, things like that feed bigger insects. And then it takes 10 pounds of those bigger insects to feed the next level, which feeds like dragonfly nymphs, bluegills, Readier sunfish, baby fish, newly hatched fish. Come here, girlfriend. Come on, get up here. Everybody wants to see girlfriend. Oh, there she goes. She's gone. And so at each level, there's a 10-to-1 conversion rate. So that's why it's real important to measure the very first trophic level of your food chain starting in the spring. And now is a good time to be thinking about that. You don't want to do anything about it right now, but you want to be thinking about that later on in the springtime. And the part of how we do that is we manage the water clarity. So we're measuring the visibility. Visibility and temperature are two of our biggest tools. Now, right now, if you don't know, it's dark, right? And so photo period shrinks in the wintertime. We'll hit the winter solstice, I think like December the 20th, shortest day of the year. And then as the earth tilts on its axis, we'll get more sunlight as we get into spring, bud break, water temperature goes up, plankton start to grow, and it's triggered by temperature, which is triggered by photo period, okay, and the angle of the sun. So now as all those things come together and plankton starts to grow, the timing is perfect in nature, but it might not be perfect in your pond. That's why I want to tell you, I want to emphasize you to pay attention to your water clarity, especially about the time the fish are starting to spawn, because when you start thinking about this, there's a mosquito. How'd they get in here? And a newly hatched fish, like a newly hatched bluegill, weighs about 1,200 per pound. You know, little bitty things. not any bigger than that. And when you see them, really all you can see are two eyes and almost a translucent body. It's almost clear. But the longer that little fish lives, the more it can eat, the more significant it can become in the food chain. So 1,200 of them are a pound, but if you've got the right food chain and you've bolstered it with nutrient management or with aeration to keep nutrients moving, and you get a good plankton bloom started, now think about it, when that fish is first hatched, it's just a tiny, tiny little speck. And think about how big its mouth is. Fish are not born with energy stores. Where's energy come from? The sun. So that fish has got to eat something that has been created or grown with input from nutrients, temperature, and sunlight. So when that little fish eats, then it doesn't die. It has no fat stored up when it's first hatched. It can't. So if that fish doesn't eat about every 30 minutes or 45 minutes after it absorbs its yolk sac, it's going to die. So if you've got enough plankton to keep those baby fish alive for 3 or 4 days, they stand a lot better chance of survival. If you can keep a bluegill alive for 45 days, they weigh 30 per pound. 45 days from 1,200 per pound to 40 per pound. Now there's always attrition, always. It's competitive. It's a fish eat fish world. So when you're thinking about managing the food chain, it all starts at that very basic trophic level with what's growing in the pond. Now, how do you do that? If I'm in the northern tier states, I'd like to have some vertical structure, like mossback fish habitat, for example. Plastic. Periphyton can start growing on that vertically in the water column when the temperature gets right. You want to manage your nutrients. The problem with using fertilizer in the north is most of the water is too fertile anyway. Second, if you're adding fertility and you're not managing it in the form of plankton, then you're going to grow plants. And the last thing you want this time next year is to have a pond that's half covered with some kind of rooted aquatic plants, because then the stage is set for a winter kill. Or you don't want to go into the winter with visibility of your water 12 inches, because then the stage is set for winter kill. And we'll talk about winter kill another time, but not today. Yep, girlfriend does love more room to roam. And we've got some of our furniture in here, so she's used to laying up on the back of our couch, and it's right over there. So let's see, I think I saw a question pop through here. Joe Arnold, what water temperature do tilapia tolerate? Is it possible some might survive in 30 feet of water if deeper temperatures don't get severe? It really depends on the strain. I don't know of any species of tilapia that can survive water temperatures as cold as it gets in most winters. So, in most states. Now, like, for example, they make it in South Texas. Now, when we had that big Arctic blast last year, killed tilapia all the way into Mexico. But tilapia, blue tilapia, nautica, I think they changed the name of them. Those things can make it down to about 40 to 42 degrees. So if your pond doesn't get below 42 degrees, they'll make it over the winter. There is no thermal refuge for tilapia in the wintertime. Mozambique, which are the ones that are legal here in Texas where I live, they die at 52 degrees. So you give them another 3 weeks, week after Thanksgiving, probably they're gone. And so they just don't count on them surviving unless you are south of a line, say from Waco, Texas to Alexandria to south of Montgomery, curving down through South Georgia and south of that line. Then you stand a chance for some of them to make it. As a fisheries biologist, I just assume they don't make it. I just assume they just adios, because if they do live, then you're trading problems. You're going to wind up with more biomass than what the pond can support over a period of time. I see Doug Brown. Let me scroll back down here. Let's see here. Loopy Sosa. Hi, Loopy. Deandra. Good to see Deandra. Let's see here. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so if you have questions, go ahead and bring them to me, and we'll chat about that a little bit. Now there's a little bit of a delay. I'm looking at it. I see Katie Cooner checking in. Good to see Katie. So what we're doing tonight is I'm talking fundamentally about the food chain. Now, as we move up the food chain, I've spent a little time talking about nutrients, sunlight, temperature coming together to create plankton, periphyton, biofilm. Periphyton is more bacteria-centered, as is periphyton, although biofilm can be, biofilm can be dead plankton floating on top of the water. Little Mike Cottrell, Mark Hicks, and let's see what Mark says. Speaking of nutrients, is there any particular species of bait fish that has a higher fat content and higher protein levels than other species of bait fish? Yeah, there are. Take shad, for example. The redfin shad are oily. Gizzard shad are oily. They have a lot of fat. And their muscles are full of red, vasculated meat. And gizzard shad, you know why they call a gizzard shad a gizzard shad? Anybody raise your hand? Oh, there goes 2 or 3 hands coming up, I see. Because they have a gizzard. Gizzard shad have a mouth, a subterminal mouth under their face. So they're bottom feeders. And when gizzard shad are first hatched, they school at the surface because they're plankton feeders. Once they get to be 7, 8, 9 inches long, then they go into shallow water and start rooting around in the mud. So if you've got a lot of shallow water with it's in a muddy bottom, that's gizzard shad paradise. And they'll end up, now gizzard shad get to be big. So I don't like stocking gizzard shad in lakes unless I'm convinced 25% of the biomass of predator fish, primarily largemouth bass, are big enough to eat a 10-inch long gizzard shad. Because we don't want gizzard shad to overpopulate. That leads to other problems. But to answer your question, gizzard shad, they all have their own nutrient load. Rainbow trout, maybe that might be the very best bait fish that a largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, northern pike, hybrid striper can eat. But they got to have cool water. And so you kind of have a conflict there because, rainbow trout. Now, rainbow trout don't like cold water. They don't like water 35 degrees. They don't do very well in that at all. But neither do bass, largemouth bass. But a rainbow trout in 55 or 60 degrees is going to thrive in it, where largemouth bass isn't. Whereas when the water temperature goes up to 65, that's when the trout slow down and the largemouth bass start to ramp up. So it's pretty common to use rainbow trout in a trophy bass management pond. Now, fathead minnows, they're a great bait fish. They just can't survive predation. They just can't make it. They can't make it longer than 18 months in a newly stocked pond after bass are added. So the answer to your question, Mark, is yes, there are species of bait fish that have a higher fat content and higher protein levels than other species of bait fish. Gizzard shad, threadfin shad have a higher fat content. Rainbow trout have a little higher protein content and they're a little bit easier to digest. Doug Brown, going to pick up some pellet-trained hybrid striped bass in a few weeks. Will they eat pellets during the winter? Kind of depends on where you are, Doug. I don't remember where you hang out. But here's the answer. Hybrid stripers will actively feed until the water temperature gets down below 55 degrees. Now, they'll still feed, but they'll be sluggish about it. They'll also be actively feeding based on how many you stock. The more you stock up to a point, the more competitive they'll be. The more competitive they are, the more likely they'll come out of that natural food chain and keep eating pellets. All right, Frank James, speaking of rainbow trout, have you heard that they are hard to source this year? My usual supplier is having a tough time finding them. I have not. I've kind of extracted myself from the fish sourcing business. I depend on American Sport Fish Hatchery to kind of keep me apprised of what's going on with fish, but I really don't. I haven't talked to them about it. I know that they placed orders and they're going through their regular supplier, and I haven't heard them say that they're not able to get any, so I don't know. Okay, Doug Brown, South Georgia. Oh yeah, you know what, South Georgia, you're in a great spot for hybrid striped bass. Those things ought to do really, really well. They ought to thrive very, very well there. I'm going to scroll back up and make sure I've not missed any questions so far. And in the meantime, talking about that, about the food chain concept, once we go up, let's see here. Once we go up the food chain to that second level, above the plankton, okay, I see John Pearson. Will sandstone creek gravel size from sand to 3 inches work for Readier beds, or is it better to buy river gravel? Stone creek gravel, yeah, I see that as the same thing. If you've got from sand, now 3 inches is too big. those little bitty rocks and gravel need to be small enough that Readier can move them around. And they're not going to move a 3 inch piece of rock. So river gravel, I tell you what, let's do it this way. 3/8 of an inch to just say 7/8 of an inch. I wouldn't have it much bigger than 7/8 if you want to use it exclusively for spawning beds. You know, so 1/2 inch, 3/8 to 1/2 inch, slightly bigger than 1/2 inch. That's good. That's about the right size. Okay, so now we've talked about plankton. We've talked a little bit about, now there's phytoplankton and there's zooplankton. You can't have zooplankton without phytoplankton. Zooplankton is animal plankton, parameciums, amoebas. We studied those when we were in school, right? And so those turn around and feed small insects, you know, and if the timing is right. Now, you know, one of the things I preach all the time is as goes the habitat, so goes what lives in it. If you've got prime habitat for those species, they're going to thrive. But the big point I want to drive home tonight is you got to have the right habitat to grow the food that grows the food, that becomes the food, and produces food for your target species. So if you got the right habitat to grow plankton, if you got the right habitat to grow insects, if you got the right habitat to help young, newly hatched fish thrive, if you got the right habitat for medium-sized fish to thrive, the right kind of fish for the right kind of habitat for adult fish to thrive, then you're going to have an ecosystem that's going to excel. But if you're missing any of those pieces, that's going to be your limiting factor. And I'll tell you this, 99% of the time, over the last 40 plus years of me doing this, the number one limiting factor for lakes and ponds and fishery is food. So somewhere in that chain of events, those different trophic levels of the food chain, something breaks. And when that breaks, that influences what's going on beneath the food chain as well as above that level of the food chain. So it's important that you learn more about that and pay more attention to it. Looks like I got a pretty good internet connection. AT&T came out and hooked us up. That looks pretty good. Good clarity. Boy, those reflections are kind of cool. Can't wait till we're actually having everything done. You hear the echo. So thinking about the way you want to manage your food chain is like in the South, we manage the base of the food chain with fertility. You do the same thing in the Midwest and you do the same thing in the North. The methods and the consequences are different. So if you can manage that to create the next level, and by the way, think about this. What do dragonflies reproduce on? What's habitat for mayfly nymphs? What kind of structure cover do damselfly nymphs need to make it? What grows Daphnia? Is it just food? Is it just the right water chemistry? What is it? And that's the take-home point that I want to drive home tonight. Is if you understand the way that each one of these levels work, and then you can figure out how to make your pond work better for that, then you're going to have a more successful fishing lake. Now, you can take all this, throw it in the trash, buy a bag of Purina Aquamax MVP Sport Fish food, and you can bypass a whole lot of the food chain. That's part of the purpose of the fish food, is to bypass the food chain. Damn it. I'm going to go get a bottle of water. Hey, honey, are you around? You have clothes on? Oh, never mind. I'm going to go get something to drink. I should have done that. I'm a little out of sorts. Thank goodness I got one Diet Dr. Pepper in the refrigerator. My throat's acting funny. Danny Mac. Danny's eating supper over the keyboard. Hey, do not drip ketchup on the keyboard, dude. But you knew that. Jerry Siebert from Oregon. I just stocked my pond with channel catfish. Water temperature is 48. Should I feed them with fish food? I don't know that they'll eat at 48. I doubt it. Channel catfish tend to stop eating when the water temperature hits, the low 50s. You know, and if you just stock the pond, they're not going to be acclimated to it yet. They're going to go down deep and cluster and just lay there, and they'll move around a little bit. Now, one thing to remember, since we're talking about the food chain, is all fish are cold-blooded. So their metabolism rate is based on the temperature of their environment. So channel cat at 48 degrees, their metabolism gets really, really slow, so their food requirements drop. So they don't eat nearly as much and nearly as often. And that's the same with all fish, even cold water fish. When the water temperature hits 37 or 38 degrees, rainbow trout are hunkered down. They're not feeding actively at all. I mean, I'm not telling that these fish won't eat. They do. Or you wouldn't be catching fish through the ice up there in Michigan and Minnesota and, you know, all over that part of the country. Tyler Cole had 1 of 200 catfish eating tonight in Santo. It's too cold. Actually, Tyler, I'll tell you what's going on here. Your water temperature is not too cold. You had a cold front come through. So what typically happens when a cold front comes through, this is very interesting to me. And I learned this back in 1980 when I first started feeding fish on a fish farm. But prior to a front passing, the fish would gorge themselves. You couldn't give them enough food. They eat like crazy as the barometric pressure is dropping. Now, once that front passes, the next 2 or 3 or 4 days, they've filled their bellies up. The water temperature's dropped some. Now, the barometer stabilized. It's beginning, the barometric pressure is going up. The temperature's beginning to stabilize. They're not nearly as active. Now, I haven't checked the temperature in Santo, Texas, but I bet you your water temperature's in the mid 60s, and that's still warm enough for them to eat. So I would expect them to be feeding. Although I can see why they're not feeding right now because you're just a couple of days past the cold front. Come on, get up here. Come here, girlfriend. And she runs away again. So now let's see, what is it? It's 6:58. Yep, so Tyler said that's true. A few nights ago, they were pigging out on Aquamax pond fish. I need to get some MVP. You know what? If you're just feeding channel catfish, that Aquamax pond fish is just fine. It costs less money. It's grain-based. Channel catfish are more omnivorous. They can digest that and convert it very, very well. So now if you want them to get bigger quicker, then I'd buy both. I'd get some MVP, mix it with some of that pond diet, and just mix it up, feed them both. Hey, commercial time. Danny Mac, say it for me. That's right. We want to say thank you to Texas Hunter Feeders. Our buddies there, I love their customer service. Now they don't pay me. Now they do pay for advertising we can help them promote their products. But they would, if you're going to buy a feeder, they would just send that you buy a feeder through a dealer is going direct to them, which you do it either way. But the thing I love about Texas Hunter is not only are their products good, their customer service is good. I know this, I can send an email when I order a feeder for somebody, one of my clients. I can send an email or give them a call on the phone, give them all the information where to ship it. They'll drop ship it right to you. You know, and they'll do it as long as they get it by 2 o'clock on a work day, on a business day, they're going to send it out. I'm also a big fan of Purina Game Fish Chow, Purina MVP, all the Purina feed products. You know, and I love the story. There's their ad on the back of each issue. I've told this story before, but it's pretty entertaining. Gosh, I guess it was back in 1995. We decided we wanted to take Pond Boss magazine nationwide. It was actually a newsletter back then. and we wanted to take it nationwide, but we needed a nationwide advertiser. So we wrote a letter, Walter Bassano and I wrote a letter to Purina Mills, sent it to 1601 South Hanley Drive, St. Louis, Missouri, Attention Marketing Department. Bam, personal letter. We didn't know who it was, so we sent it. Shoot, 5 or 6 days later, we get a phone call from one of the top marketing guys. They said, hey, we want the inside front cover of your magazine, but better yet, we want to sit down and visit with you about this industry. We see what you guys are doing as a burgeoning industry, and we'd like to develop some products for this industry. And let's fast forward since 1995, 26 years, and they've done that. And they have sincerely been interested in helping create products that you and I can use. And I use them all the time. I still have 6 ponds at our office, which office is for sale. If anybody's interested, I'll make you a pretty good deal. Sell it at appraised price, which everything is selling above appraised price. But if somebody's looking for 8 acres with a 4,000 square foot building on it, office building that could be converted to a home, talk to me. I'm interested. So kind of went off the rails on that sidebar a little bit, didn't I? So anyway, and I also want to thank David Schneiderman. Oh my gosh, honey, you look great. Holy cow, that's a beautiful dress.
Is it because you bought it?
Oh, you know what? I bought that in New Mexico, didn't I?
Yeah.
You know, when I was broadcasting in New Mexico, I went to a little shop to see if I could find something for Debbie. By golly, I did buy that dress. Golly, hooray for me. She looks great in it. It matches her cabinets. So anyway, David Schneiderman, I bumped into him a couple weeks ago out at Heroes Ranch. I told you guys about Heroes Ranch. You need to check them out. Great, 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 great place. Anyway, Easy Docks of Texas, David Schneiderman. Matter of fact, you know what? The next drawing, we're going to give away one of these little tote bags. Well, oh, Debbie must have taken it.
What?
That little Easy Dock tote bag.
Oh, I've already put it in the closet.
Oh, she snagged it and ran off with it. I thought I had it over here. So anyway, there's my commercials. $35 a year for Pond Boss Magazine. Cheaper than a Friday, cheaper than a Monday night, cheaper than a Saturday night date. So anyway, and Chris Blow will get on to me if I don't talk about this. The Institute of Higher Pondology. We have 22 videos up, 6 different modules. I think if you buy them all one at a time, it's over $1,100. But if you bundle it and buy all of them, they're $495. And I will promise you this: you will save money from not paying the dumb tax if you watch those videos. Now, if you have a piece of property and you want to build a lake, or you want to manage your fishery, or deal with the runaway aquatic plants, we've got something on that in that curriculum for you. Now, I'm also beginning to think about doing an in-person Institute of Higher Pondology here at Pecan Plantation where we are. They got great facilities. They've got some ponds. Haven't made all the contacts yet. Haven't set any dates. I'm thinking next fall is what I'm thinking. So we will check it out. Travis said it's cheaper than to go get lunch. Oh, honey, our daughter's calling. She's on her way. So, as you can tell, there's a lot going on. We have a lot of moving parts in this deal here. So now let's go back. I do want you to ask more questions. Let's visit about that. But going back to that food chain. So now, where people get into a little bit of a bind. A while ago I said 99% of the lakes run out of food. And where they run out of food is once the predator fish begin to reproduce. Hey, James Allen from Kentucky, good to see you. And what happens is when you first stock a pond, the mission is to get the food chain moving up. Then you add your predator fish, in most cases largemouth bass. And here we go now, year 1, 18 months. Now we're at about year 2, moving into year 3, and now it's starting to go like that a little bit. And then by the time we get into year 3, these fish are reproducing. So they're having a whole bunch more baby predator fish as these fish are reproducing. And so what begins to happen is these fish gain an advantage in numbers and mass and start to deplete the food chain. So if you have a weak plankton bloom, or if you're secondary level, tertiary level, if each level of your food chain is moving up, and you can tell about how clear the water is and what kind of shape your fish are in and what kind of insects that you can find in the water. You know, if you really want to get into this checking insects and stuff, you can buy a plankton net that you can throw out on a rope and drag through your pond and let all the water filter out this micro sort of, I can't think of the name of the cloth, but it lets all the water sift out, and then it leaves everything else behind in a jar, and you can pick it up and look at it through the jar. And you can see what kind of bugs you've got. Or if you're really into it, you can look at them under a microscope. It's really fun to do that. But then what happens is the predator fish start to gain an advantage. Now, always remember a story that Mark Cornwell taught me and told me about. Mark is fisheries biologist. He's the fish professor. Has an article in every issue of the Pond Boss magazine, every issue. He was telling me that one of the Finger Lakes, or maybe Oneata, or one of the lakes up in upstate New York, started having a problem because somebody stocked alewives in it. Well, alewives eat zooplankton. Well, so do the native species of bait fish, but the alewives were so competitive, they outcompeted all the natural food, and they lost the balance, and they began to have more blue-green algae, more planktonic algae, which bottom line affected the top of the food chain because alewives couldn't support as a source of food all the predator fish like lake trout and channel catfish and largemouth bass and some of the salmon that are native to that lake as well. So I see some kind of a note coming up there. So anyway, so how do you manage that part of the food chain? Anybody? Harvest. You got to be culling something. And when your food chain begins to decline like that, it's time to be culling some of those overcrowded largemouth bass, overcrowded bluegills, whatever they are. It's time to be culling some of those. So let's see here. I'm going to roll back down here. Doug Brown, what type of bluegill habitat would you recommend around or near feeders? Texas 100 feeders throws pellets, I think, 40 L by 20 wide. Yeah, that's right. So they throw, I tell you what, bluegills, I've watched bluegills go 400 yards to come to a fish feeder, eat fish food, and go 400 yards to go home. But the question you asked is, what type of habitat would I have around or near the feeders? The more dense habitat you have for bluegills, the safer they are. Now, when I say dense, just visualize a beaver lodge. That's dense. Now, whenever we're electrofishing ponds, if there's a beaver lodge, I can't wait to stick those electrodes in it because it looks like popcorn. That's where every little bitty bait fish is going to be hanging out. And it's the more dense that the cover is, the more tight that it is. Think Christmas trees, although Christmas trees deteriorate pretty quick. You know, so dense and have it 40 to 50 feet away, 60 feet away from that straight line that those Texas 100 feeders throw the fish feed. Now, you can adjust how far the feeders throw. If you don't want it throwing 40 feet, you can scale it back with using the timer. There's a setting on there that lets you figure out, lets you set up how far you want that feed to be thrown out. You know, and so adjacent to that habitat, this dense habitat, that's where I like to have spawning beds. So when the bluegills spawn, those babies can come off the beds, go straight into dense cover, graze on periphyton, or picking plankton out of the water, and when they get big enough, they can slip out and eat a little fish food and come right back before maybe they get eaten by a big bass that figured out how to play the game. James Allen's wife saw him eating mini wheats for breakfast and thought it was pure and largemouth bass fish food. I can see how that would happen. I can see how somebody's wife would see that. My question is, do you eat bananas with it? Okay. A true fisherman will eat largemouth fish pellets. Now, see, there you go. Yep, Doug Brown, he knows. He's been eating fish food for years. All right, let's see. What else you guys want to talk about? There's a cold front about to come through, and our temperatures are going to drop. So, Tyler Cole, your water temperature is getting ready to drop down to that temperature here, probably another 3 to 4 weeks in north central Texas to where the fish are going to slow down. Here's the deal. When you're feeding fish, just watch them. They're going to tell you. Now, one thing I learned at Richmond Mill Lake in North Carolina is up until that point, and this would have been like 2006, 2007, through there somewhere, up until that point, I had made it a point to stop feeding the fish once the water temperature dropped below 50. So I got to talking with Jim Morgan there at Kingfisher Society back then. I said, you know what? Why don't we keep just? That project was a major turning point. Let me give you a little backstory on that. You guys will think this is pretty interesting. That water, the pH is 5.3, 0 alkalinity, and it flows between 7 and 10,000 gallons a minute in and out that lake every day. So I knew there was not going to be any possible way that we could fertilize it, can't lime it. We cannot count on that water to produce the basis of a food chain. And it never had up to that point. Jim has told me stories about how many fish they didn't catch because they weren't there. So that water essentially was sterile. Now it supported a fish population, but it was minimal because the food chain was minimal. The majority of the food chain came from macrophytic plants growing in, oh gosh, I said a big word. Let me change that. Rooted plants growing up in shallow water that had enough growth on the underneath side of the leaves to support things like grass shrimp or other stuff. I just got a text. All right. But what we decided to do, that's when we called Mark Griffin, who was nutritionist at Trent at that time. I said, hey, Mark, I think we got a shot at making these Aquamax fish foods a little bit more complete. Now, I'm going to save all this story to tell you this. He was up for the challenge, and that was the era that these largemouth bass pellets were developed for feed-trained bass. Because what we decided to do is let's bring in some feed-trained bass, let's stock heavy with bluegills and see what happens, and let's feed the heck out of them. So we set up 50 feeders. We had 10 vibratory feeders to feed newly hatched fish. So in those 10 vibratory feeders, we put them adjacent to where we knew there were spawning beds. And they were set to go off like 5 times a day, vibrate for 4 or 5 seconds, shake out little bitty pieces of Aquamax fish food. Then we had 15 feeders that were set up for largemouth bass. And now all these feeders, the vibrating feeders were hanging off of these bars that we had in the water. All the other feeders sat on platforms. Now 15 of those feeders were set up on platforms with spinner plates to throw feed in the 360-degree circle. And we were able to set them low enough back then where we could put those largemouth pellets in there once they got the pellets developed. Now we fed them Aquamax 600 up to that point. And then we had 25 feeders that were directional feeders that we spaced around the lake, hoping to feed more bluegills than anything else. And so what the mission was to take that lake and make it solely dependent on fish food coming out of a box. And it worked. And not only did it work, the byproduct of that was not only were we growing big fish off the fish food, and they had a big fish bill. $26,000 a year was their fish bill. But they were trying to create an environment, artificially prop it up, grow big fish, to use it in their business as a resort destination. That was the mission. And so we did. And that's where we actually grew some 3-pound, 4-ounce bluegills. We had no idea we were going to grow bluegill. Now, we didn't grow very many of those, but we grew a lot of bluegill in excess of 2 pounds. 2 pounds, 4 ounces, 2 pounds, 6 ounces. I've got pictures tracking back to like 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 of this massive 2-pound plus bluegills. And part of the reason I believe that happened was of those 25 feeders that were designated to feed bluegills, when the temperature dropped, we didn't stop feeding the bluegills. We kept feeding those bluegills. But what we did was we scaled back the amount. And what we figured out coming into each spring was there was a small percentage of the bluegills that still continued to come and eat. So they were kind of the feed hogs. And they would come and eat, and those fish continued to grow a little bit throughout the wintertime. Now, they didn't grow a lot, but they didn't lose any weight. Typically, what happens when you go into the winter, the fish have just fed like crazy right now. Right now is the time to be feeding your fish. Because with these temperatures at prime operating levels, those fish are going to gorge themselves, fill themselves up with fat, store that fat, and they're going to live off of that going through the winter. Now, like I said earlier, they'll still eat, they just won't eat much. And they'll metabolize their fat. If they don't have good stores of fat going into the winter, they'll metabolize flesh. And we don't want them to do that because then when coming out of the winter, they got to make it up. If they lose it, then it takes time to make it up, and then that shows up on the backside of their lives. Their growth potential is highly diminished. So I'm 100% convinced after about 5 or 6 winters of feeding bluegills through the winter and catching some of them in the winter and outside of Laurinburg, North Carolina, that feeding those fish through the winter was smart. Now, we didn't feed that much fish food. We set those feeders to go off maybe 4 seconds once a day. And a 50-pound bag of fish food in each one of those fish feeders lasted 2 months. So we weren't feeding a huge amount of fish food, but we were definitely seeing an impact. And it made a big difference. And I firmly believe that's a big, big reason that lake produced that many 2-pound plus bluegills. Now, another reason it did was by feeding the fish, we were able to not only prop up that fishery, but some of the fish food was uneaten. And of course, when those fish eat it, they don't digest all of it, so they're giving off a pretty rich waste byproduct, which turns around and feeds other fish because we had the perfect habitat for grass shrimp, banded sunfish, top minnows, ruds. So all those fish, suckers, I bet you if we were to drain that lake back then and weigh all the fish, I would expect largemouth bass probably was pretty close to the most biomass, but it wouldn't surprise me if suckers were the biomass, big biomass. And they're bottom feeders. So they were cleaning up everything else. So we also had a whole bunch of these 6 to 12 inch long suckers that the bass could eat as well. So that whole food chain was propped up really, really well. Justin, I tell you what, if anybody wants to email me, just send an email to info@pondboss.com. I'll get it, and so will Leanne, who is our advertising director, and she's my executive assistant. That's a pretty cool title. I wish I was an executive assistant, but she is. And if you'll send it to info@pondboss.com, I'll get it. Now, we got grandkids coming when, honey? About 30 minutes? Okay. So I'm fixing to be tied up with grandkids. We got a grandkid playing football in the playoffs on Thursday. Have a little granddaughter, Hadley, going to spend 2 or 3 days with us. So we got a lot of good stuff going on. So I'll do the best I can to answer emails. I'll have to get up ahead of everybody else, which I do anyway. So, looks like Debbie's kind of wandering aimlessly around, but she's got a rag in her hand wiping stuff off. Now she's drinking Topo Chico. That's her favorite drink. Well, kind of her favorite drink. All right. Hit me with some questions. Looks like our audience is waning a little bit, and if we're waning, it might be time to start wrapping it up, which I'm okay with that. I do want to tackle just a little bit more food chain talk. If you don't really understand how that base of the food chain works, spend a little time learning that. And we've got articles on it in Pond Boss Magazine. Have I told you about Pond Boss Magazine? $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date. And like talking about earlier, cheaper than lunch. Especially if you're eating boudin, like Christopher Aguilar does, eats boudin. So anyway, we've got quite a few articles talking about your resources. info@pondboss.com. Email us if you want to talk about stuff. Pondboss.com. Ask the Boss discussion forum. We've had that up in this format since 2002, 19 years. They told us the internet was a fad. I guess it's not. So, lots of good resources for you to go. Let's see what else we got here. Kirk wants to know if I fish bass tournaments. I do not. I like to watch you fish bass tournaments. No, yeah, Travis. Hey, honey, Travis says you're looking for more projects to do.
Yeah.
She does have her little brain twisting and turning all over this stuff. James Allen says, did I miss when the new book is coming? Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Thank you. The new book is finished. It's being laid out. Photos are being inserted. And we figured out the cover today. So the cover's done. I don't think that we're going to be able to get it printed and distributed before Christmas. But I'm waiting on a more firm estimate for the cost of the layout and design, as well as the print bill. Then I can price the book. But I got a feeling it's going to be somewhere to the tune of $25, which it was plus a little bit of shipping, $22 to $25. I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be 160 pages. It's going to be called Beyond the Basics, The Fundamentals of Pond Management by Bob Lusk. So I'm pretty interested in getting that book out there. I was hoping to make it by Christmas, but that ain't going to happen. However, we'll sell some. We'll pre-sell some. So I'll tell you what we'll do. I will put on this Facebook page, when we figure out the pricing, I'll put that out there. And if anybody wants to buy one in advance, we can do that. I'll get Leanne to put it in the Pond Boss store online. We'll figure all that out. We'll have a meeting here in the next couple of days and see what happens. All right, let's see here. Let me see here. Travis says, Bob can tell you how to grow fish. Catching them is up to you. Yeah, that's right. You know, there's a speech that I gave that people have seen, I don't know how many times, but I went on a road trip and met up with the bassresource.com folks probably 15 years ago at Kentucky Lake. And Glenn May asked me if I would speak about the myths of bass fishing or the myths of bass production. So I thought about it for about 30 minutes and I gave a speech, and then he videoed it and put it up there. And that one of the first things I said was, everybody in this room can beat me when it comes to catching fish, but you're not going to beat me when it comes to growing those fish that you catch. And that's my lane, and I've gotten to understand it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm the best one on the planet, but I have a head start from you and other folks. So let's see here. John Pearson says, is it too late to stock 1 to 3 inch largemouth bass, Western Kentucky? I'm going to tell you, John, I would not do that. Now, let me tell you why. A 1 to 3 inch bass was probably hatched last April or May. And the first 6 or 8 months growth time for a largemouth bass is the most significant. And so a bass hatched in March, April, or May of last year ought to be 8 to 9 inches long right now. So if it's small like that, then it didn't grow like it should have. And those fish are not going to have the jump start. It would be smarter to wait until next spring. Even if you stock those bass now, they're getting into the winter months. They're not going to feed. They're not going to grow. And they certainly don't have stores of fat, or they'd be bigger than 3 inches long. So I would not stock 1 to 3 inch bass this time of year. I'd wait and stock next year's hatch when they get to be 2 to 4 inches long. And that's going to be end of May, 1st of June, depending on the producers that you're going to buy them from. Justin goes to the Pond Boss Farm at lunch every day. You know, I need to do that, but I don't. I need to, but maybe one of these days I will. Kirk says I ought to fish tournaments. You have more detailed knowledge than all the best fishermen I know. I don't know, man. I've been out with some great fishermen. I've been in the boat with Bill Dance. I've been in the boat with Marty Stone, Jimmy Houston. Ray Scott. A lot of the old school guys. I've spent time with them, and man, they have this innate ability to find the fish, and then the instinctive ability to figure out what that fish will eat to catch it. I don't have that. So, here we go. Mark Dyer, Beyond the Basics, cheaper than a Saturday night date. My wife loves me, and one thing, when I get a little pompous, I'm not going to say it to her because I know what she'd say. I'd say, honey, what's it like hanging out with an author? And she would say, what's it like selling everything you know for 25 bucks? Ouch. So I'm not going to say that. She just walked by and looked at me and snickered a little bit. Travis said, that's the first video I watched of you. That was 3 years ago. It was longer ago. Well, you watched it 3 years ago, but that video was a lot longer than that. There's Tom Davis in Ohio. So I think I'm going to leave it right there. And once I get more details on this book, I'll share that with you folks. And once again, I sincerely thank you for hanging out. I was not quite sure where I was going to be tonight. I was hoping it would be here. But if you'd have seen this house 5 days ago, you would have said, there's no chance, buddy. But my wife is a magician, and she's a hard worker, and she's tired, and she's cranky because she's a hard worker. And she's poured her heart into this home, and I can't wait to hang out here with her and see where this thing goes. And once we get it like she wants it, we'll take you on a tour because her eyes are just fascinating. Like, there's a rock arch right there. As a matter of fact, you know what? I'm going to spin this thing around. She doesn't really want you to see it yet, but I'm going to do it anyway. So as we spin around, you can kind of see what's going on in this house. Now, the cabinets are not finished being painted. Neither are the walls. All the doors and drawers are off. But you can see, I mean, look at the lights. You know, that's pretty cool. This is a cedar bench I'm sitting on. That bench where it was logs 6 weeks ago. And now it's boards and it's up in this house. So I'm proud of my wife, and I love her, and I'm so glad that she's doing this because pretty cool place. And then right over my shoulder is the river, which we will do that one of these days too. So, hey, thanks for hanging out. Get more details on the book. I'll get it back to you. And I'm not sure where I'll be next Wednesday. Hopefully it'll be here. Well, no. Oh, gosh, we got Thanksgiving next week. I'll be in Van Alstyne, Texas, and see if I can figure out how to do a Oh, she's shaking her head. I don't know what's going to happen next Wednesday, but we'll let you know. Leanne will put something up. So until then, thanks again for joining me. Adios. I'll see you next time.